Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on these two European nightcrawler worm bins, but something I just spotted a moment ago. Not sure if it's visible on the camera, but I could see one right there, and I saw another one that was a little bit larger, which is usually two of them stuck together. It's these gnats or fruit flies or whatever they are. Flying insects in here, which I thought I had for the most part done away with in my worm bins, but evidently they're still here. And whenever I feel like I want to try to treat a system against those little guys, it's this stuff here. The stuff that's in this little squirt bottle is my mosquito dunks. So I was about to roll the camera when I spotted a couple of those little flying insects crawling around, and I took an extra moment to go grab the squirt bottle to get it out here so we can apply some of that before we do anything else. Because when those little guys get into your systems, you have to assume that they're probably somewhere near the surface. So here again, I'm seeing one that I might have crushed earlier, but one crawling right there. I see something smaller crawling right there, but that's a mite of some sort. So it doesn't seem like it's a chronic situation by any means. Perhaps previous applications of this BTI mosquito dunks solution has helped in the past and is getting us on the road to recovery with regards to having flying insects in the systems. But anytime I spot them, it is always best to put the stuff in right on the top, because what you're trying to hit is probably right there on the surface or near the surface. So let's get some of this squirted in here before we get to work. It's so nice when you look at one of these European nightcrawler bins or the African nightcrawler bins. The nightcrawlers, being a somewhat larger size worm, leave what appears to me somewhat larger size castings than some of the smaller size worms. It's kind of cool to see like individual castings kind of resting all next to each other like a whole bunch of little tiny shavings of wood or something, all piled up over there right above where we last fed. It does look like we might have left behind feeding zone indicators. That's what I believe we're seeing, some leftovers over here. Usually when I feed, I try to put down what I refer to as a feeding zone indicator, which is usually just a coffee filter positioned right over where we last fed. But a lot of times the worms just come up and they gobble up the feeding zone indicator. I believe here too we might be seeing a little tiny scrap of what remains of our feeding zone indicators. Luckily, the stuff that I've got for them today includes a couple days worth of coffee hidden over here beneath this head of rotting broccoli. So those two coffee filters there will go in at the end as replacements for our feeding zone indicators. That head of broccoli, it's in the plastic bag, because even through the plastic bag I can smell it already. I don't know if you've ever smelt broccoli as it starts to go bad. It really reeks. And my aim was to just get it out of that bag. I've got my knife here too. I was going to cut the thing in half so that we can put half in one bin, half in the other bin, get the thing covered up, and then, limit its opportunity to stink up the entire room with its stench. So I think before we open up the feeding zone, which is down the middle, I thought we would do a little bit of a aeration of the outskirts of the system. I know that in a few of my recent feedings I've been sort of foregoing the step that I like to do sometimes, which is just to explore the outer edges of the bins and to aerate. And I can't remember if these systems were a couple of those where I had just consciously made the decisions to skip checking the outer edges. So just in case that is the case, I wanted to make sure I definitely do it here today. So I'm just sort of aerating and stirring up what's in the outer edges first, and then we'll dive into seeing how they did with their last feeding. There is a novelty item over here in bin number 1. This looks like maybe the skin of some apple or something. Interesting. Over here in bin number 1, we've got a compostable bag. A compostable bag that's been in service now with these worms for 222 days. So yeah, even though these systems are only 60 days of age, for quite some time in their previous homes, the worms that live over here in bin number 1 had already been working on this compostable bag for some time, and when the worms were relocated into their new homes here 60 days ago. Along with the worms came their compostable bag in progress. I sort of have two ages for the compostable bag. The other age is, I don't know, perhaps a few weeks longer, which is actually the day that the bag went into the systems originally. But then there was a pause. There was a period of time during which the compostable bag was seeing very little, if any, action. So I sort of deducted that sort of dead spot. And the 220 days of in progress of the compostable bag is, like I said a moment ago, the in progress active composting days, so that if at some point we do come to the determination that the compostable bag is in fact fully broken down, then we'll have a sense of just how many days it takes for that to happen in a worm bin. The sucker's been holding together quite nicely. I mean, it certainly doesn't look like a bag much anymore. It kind of seems sort of tattered and shredded. Definitely showing signs of wear, but in some ways still preserving its recognizability in terms of being a bag, a compostable bag. So I think we've done a pretty decent job aerating the outer edges of both of these bins. I think we're set to now dive down into the feeding zones. 11 days have passed since we last checked in here and fed these little guys. And from what I remember, the stuff they got last time was something that we wouldn't expect to see many leftovers of. It was cantaloupe rind. And I guess the one thing that you kind of do expect to find as leftovers of cantaloupe rind is the very, very outer skin, that tough, slightly woody kind of material of the cantaloupe rind. But all the other parts of the cantaloupe rind are probably long gone. But if we do spot some little bits of recognizable stuff, it wouldn't be too surprising. Stuff like this right here is clearly recognizable as cantaloupe rind. But it's like paper thin, and it's only that really tough outer layer. Now, amongst those leftovers is already signs of the compostable bag, so I usually try my best to not inflict excessive force on the bag, because I am definitely interested in seeing what kind of progress can be made on its own without my help, so that, you know, at some point when it does come to the point where we consider the bag as composted, not even sure how that day might look in the future, but we'll see, then we can say that those days that it took were in fact sort of the bin and the processes that occur in the bin being responsible for that breakdown, not me tearing at it and, you know, ripping at it and doing things to help it break down. I mean, look at that. It's definitely still holding together as a single object in a way. Although I sort of had this sense at some point during one of our check-ins, maybe the last check-in, that there might have been a portion of it that had come detached from the rest of the bag. So we'll see if we can probe around in here just a little bit more to see if we stumble on anything that resembles that. I could just be misremembering at this point. I'm looking at some of these other leftovers besides the cantaloupe rinds. Some of these other pieces of material, I'm not 100% sure what they are. Perhaps they're more of what they're getting today, which you might have noticed when I showed the foods that they're getting today. It's some mango skins, and if you look at the appearance of those, they do seem like those could have been mango skins as well, put in here besides the cantaloupe rinds. It did seem to me like if we put a whole bunch of sweet goodies like that in and around the compostable bag, then we'd be bringing a good bit of worm traffic to the compostable bag to further help in its breakdown. So now right here I'm sort of getting the feeling that maybe what we've encountered here is that little fragment of the compostable bag that had come detached from the rest of the compostable bag, but is still a single object. So it almost seemed to me like I almost took a little tear out of it, which I wouldn't want to cause. I just want to let it remain intact and let it continue breaking down on its own without my help. So I just set it off to the side over there, and we'll proceed to opening up a similar hole over in bin number 2 so we can get the feeding into both of these systems. Here I'm not going to need to be as careful in excavating the feeding zone. I'm not looking for bits and pieces of a leftover compostable bag, but we will find similar leftover bits of the food that we fed because both bins were fed very similarly. And it does almost look like perhaps this could have been mango. I'm not sure. I do recall feeding mango peels recently. This over here is a kind of a novelty object, the stem of a pumpkin. Definitely coming along pretty good, but just another one of those things that I have a tendency to not want to help with the breakdown process, and I just prefer to see how things go, you know, allowing it to break down on its own. So yeah, things look pretty good over here. I think we're almost set to come in here with a little bit of a foundational bedding to plop in beneath their feeding, and then in can go that nasty, stinky broccoli. And then I'll be looking to cover that thing up pretty quick, so I want to make sure I'm prepared. I've got my knife. It's all set to go because that head of broccoli, I do want to cut it in half so that half of it can go into one bin, the other half can go in the other bin. And then we can pile in all the rest of the other foods on top of it. But let's not forget, we wanted to include a little bit of bedding too. So I've got my prepared bedding here. I just want to make sure I don't drop in. I see this one hitchhiker on my glove here. I always worry that I'm going to plop in a little hitchhiker into my bedding supply box, and then all of a sudden I'm going to be surprised one day when I come in here to grab some bedding for some future use and then find a little worm family making itself at home in its nice palatial new home. So that's our foundation, and then I think we can just start right into the feeding. So I don't know, there's something very unique about the smell of broccoli as it starts to degrade. It's a smell that I don't like, and I'm sure not many people like, because it is kind of disgusting. And just look at that. That is a nice, generous heap of food right there. And I mean, now that I mention it, it doesn't really seem as offensive as I thought that it was. I mean, it doesn't smell terribly pleasant, but it doesn't feel like I'm gonna get ill from the smell of it either. But from what I remember, anytime I've ever fed broccoli in the past, the worms have really gone mad for it and left pretty much no signs of it. So I have a feeling that they're going to be similarly jazzed for this delicious big portion of delicious broccoli that they're getting. And even when I was coming down here earlier and I felt the overall weight of the stuff that I was bringing down, I could tell that it was a nice generous portion. So let's see, we've got banana peels in addition to the broccoli. So besides the healthy vegetables, they're getting some yummy fruits in here too. And this is the peels and seeds from 2 mangoes. So here's one of the mangoes, had a pretty, I don't know, it was pretty overripe already and barely even edible anymore from a human perspective. So a lot of the meaty portion of it was left on the seed. This is the seed from another one which was not quite as far along, so more of the seed was able to get carved off and eaten. So luckily we've got a fairly even portion of everything so far to apply to each of these systems. Looks pretty good, looks pretty good. So I think before we bring in all the leftovers that we encountered along the way, all those old mango skins and old cantaloupe rind skins. Let's also, let's see, what was I about to say? I forgot. I just kind of lost my train of thought there. It was something to do about bringing in the last of the portion of food that we've got for them. So my idea was to get that plastic bag sort of nested in between various delicious things, so that here at the end, when we pile in the day's worth of coffee on top, it puts that compostable bag smack in the middle of all the fun, where all the worms are going to be coming out to feast on all these delicious foods. Another thing I'm going to pile in here on top of the coffee is a little bit of my worm chow too. That's a pretty good portion of worm chow. And let's give them a little grit as well. Some of my pulverized eggshell, which I like to use as grit in my worm bins too. Whew, man. I'm glad that it didn't stink the way I thought it would. I thought it was going to be just stinking to high heaven with that nasty head of broccoli, but luckily it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. There was just like an odor already coming out of the bag that I could smell, and it's kind of a familiar nasty odor that I don't like. So I kind of thought that once that bag got opened that it would just be like smacking me in the face and being an extremely offensive nasty odor, and fortunately, that was not the situation here. I'm happy to report. So now before we come back in with those somewhat heavily broken down top covering newspapers, because even though they're heavily broken down already, they got some pretty good signs of wear on them, I'm going to just lay them back out here as we found them in the beginning, resting out across the top. I also thought that perhaps even before we put in the feeding zone indicators, we could come in with my leaf collection, because I've got my nice collection of leaves here, fully restocked box of leaves. Because the material in these bins feels a little bit damp to me, and I believe that dropping in a little bit of this dry stuff on the very top surface will help absorb a little bit of that moisture into itself, possibly bringing the overall moisture content of these systems down a hair, which I don't think would slow things down considerably. I think what I worry more about, even more than slowing the composting action down, is allowing the systems to become muddy and nasty. And it doesn't seem to me like we're in great risk of having that happen here either, but still, it did seem to me like perhaps dropping in a little bit of dry like this on the top would end up benefiting the systems overall in the long run. Not to mention the fact that I kind of like the way my bins look after I had just finished dropping in some nice leafy matter across the top surface. It sort of gives my bins that somewhat natural appearance for some reason. I don't know, I kind of like it too. That's the reason I like to use this stuff. Not to mention that it's abundant, and it's probably stuff that the worms really like too. That's my guess. So I think that one was holding together. This one was the one that struck me as possibly approaching that point soon, where we might want to consider just swapping it out, but for now it's still in good enough shape to just be used as a nice top covering here in the systems. And then maybe next time we'll just swap it out and make use of it as supplemental bedding down in the feeding zone. So that's it now for our check-in with the 60-day-old European Nightcrawler systems, getting feeding number 6 today after an 11-day pause between the two feedings. Oh, here we go. I was wondering where that little piece of missing newspaper got to. And I'm just wondering if there's any other information. Did I mention the 222 days? I think so. The 222 days is what I consider to be the amount of time that that compostable bag has been in service now, or as far as active composting. Perhaps a little bit longer if you really want to know how many days it's been since we actually dropped it into the system. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.